World War II. It was the good war. The opposing factions, Allied and Axis, were defined by the men who led. Men who have become archetypes of good and evil. These men defined the conflict, rallied their countrymen, demanded loyalty, and hungered for victory. But if the leaders defined the war, it was the regular citizens who fought to defend their country, ordinary men and women who rose to extraordinary heights in the midst of battle. But the memories of World War II are rapidly fading, along with the men and women who lived and fought during this momentous period. Through their stories, we must preserve the valor and courage of the soldier, sailor, marine, and airman who fought this good war. For they are the heroes of World War II. The sheer force of Allied air power probably was the single greatest factor in determining the course of World War II. The well-trained men and the vast numbers of fighters and bombers produced by the United States, along with the British, simply overwhelmed and crippled the Axis powers. The cost to Allies was high, but there was no shortage of young men ready to volunteer.
I was in college when Pearl Harbor was attacked. In fact, I was 18, I guess, at the time, and enlisted shortly after that happened.
Well, I was in college at the time, and my roommate had always wanted to be a pilot. He persuaded me to hitchhike with him when Pearl Harbor came.
Well, as a young kid, I had seen the movie Wings, and the idea of Richard Barthelmess with the white scarf and a smile on his face as he went down looked great to me.
19. I finished my 35 missions before my 20th birthday.
8 or 9 years old when I made my first flight in an old airplane that one of the guys that was taking people up, you know, for flights, took me up.
And my dad took me over there and paid $1.50 for me to take a flight in that plane. And that was the most exciting thing, and that's when I began to say, I want to be a pilot.
I thought that was great. I can still see that little bi-wing airplane that he was flying.
After I finished flying school, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and they needed pilots in almost every category there was.
I used to figure that if the guy could, if you say, how many fingers and toes do you have? And if the guy didn't look at his hands or his feet, they made him a bomber pilot. If he had to look, they made him a single-engine pilot. So, of course, the fighter pilots don't appreciate that, but...
To a young kid, you know, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, and you can fly up there and soar with the eagles, as they say. You know, it's quite a kick.
At that time, the Navy flight training was listed as between age 20 and 28. So on December the 6th, I was 20, and the Navy had told me that it'd be a while before we'll be able to call you because we've got several classes ahead of you. And so, but the next day, Sunday, December the 7th, well, on Monday morning, they told me to pack my bags and report right away.
Went into the service in early 1943 and went into basic training in Miami Beach, Florida. And everything naturally was through troop trains. We just traveled on a troop train. When basic was over with, I traveled over to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to a radio school. And then from there, another troop train to Kingman, Arizona for gunnery school.
When we were in cadets, we had, this was summertime of '42, and we had West Pointers as upperclassmen. and they like to haze you pretty well. And if you went to one of their rooms to talk to them and knocked on their door, they would say, "Who goes there?" And your answer was, "Sir, I, Robert H. Powell, Jr., am the lowest lifest, most insignificant Pithecanthropus erectus that ever slithered his slimy, slothful carcass across the portals of your chateau. May I come in, sir?" You know, it sounds silly, but what they were doing is really pushing you to see if they could break you. And a lot of that, they were providing you some discipline.
What makes good, I think, good training, and we had good training, and then practice, practice, practice.
Strangely enough, we had pilots that were excellent who couldn't keep step in formation when they marched, but they were excellent pilots. So it's hard to say where the coordination started. I think it started after they got in the air. Once you flew an airplane long enough, you became a part of the airplane. It was like riding a horse. You feel a part of the airplane. We went through primary flying, and then we went to basic. In basic, we did a little night flying and formation flying and so forth, and then we went to advanced training in Luke Field, Arizona, and we learned a lot more about aerobatics than we had learned up to that time. And we did a little practice combat, but it was very little, and a little bit of gunnery, very little. And we got our wings, and we were cocky as could be and ready to go. We wanted to find some Germans.
The problem with anything like flying an airplane, you've got to work as a team. The thing that I wanted to do more than anything else to ensure that each one of those persons that were flying with me knew their jobs and knew them well. And they knew that they had to because of the consequences that we could face in combat. The training that we did together in Alexandria during the month or so that we were there did a lot to bring us all together and for us to know each other better.
And that's when we first started to become a unit, one plane of 10 men.
You've got 4 or 5 months of flying together before you actually go into combat. And it's very comforting to know that the guy that's behind you, in front of you, and back of you is part of the team.
Well, you have to develop a camaraderie with the crew. However, you have to keep a little distinction between the officers and the enlisted men for discipline purposes. But they were all our friends, and they knew it, and I think that was important.
While the Americans were getting ready to fly to England for their first missions, many of the English pilots were arriving in America to complete their training.
I took elementary flying training in England, but then we couldn't do any more because of all the enemy activity. On training flights, you're liable to get shot down, and we couldn't train at night because of the bombers. And so we were sent over to America. Actually, there were about 8,000 RAF pilots came over here for training. And they just kept 1 or 2 of us on as instructors, which was fortunate because it gave us more experience before we got over into fighting.
When we were going to be going overseas, we went together as a crew. We went as a crew to Lincoln, Nebraska, and we picked up a brand new B-17 that was to be flown over to England.
We ended up at Langley Field, Virginia, and Langley Field, Virginia was that's where we took off from to go across to England.
For many of the young soldiers, traveling abroad to England was an exciting experience, despite the war going on around them.
That was the first time I had been out of the country, yes. And I enjoyed being there.
We spent a lot of time in British pubs when we weren't on duty. If we knew we weren't flying the next day, we could go out and hoist a few.
We gave the kids candy and gum on the trains when we'd ride the trains, and their eyes would light up, and we gave them chocolate, of course, and gum.
Well, about all of the American forces, and they just about invaded England prior to D-Day, but what the British would say is the Americans are overpaid, oversexed, and over here.
There was a good-natured rivalry between the English and the Americans, who had a little phrase of their own. According to the GIs, the English were underpaid, undersexed, and under Eisenhower.
Well, one of the things that I think we really ought to focus in on is the assistance and the help and the cooperation that we got when we were over there in England.
We'd wake up in about 3 or 4 in the morning, and they'd tell us that there is a mission we're on today.
They lift the shade up that reveals the map, showing where we're going. And when we seen that red line that goes deep into German territory, and we knew it's going to be a rough one.
We'd go and have our breakfast at the mess hall. We'd go and get our parachutes. Our armament people would have our guns for us already over there. We'd go out to our plane, and we'd start putting our chutes on, and we'd probably have another cigarette before we were getting on board. We'd climb in on the fuselage side, and everybody would just go to their particular stations. But the radio room being the middle of the plane, basically the center of the plane, I had a lot of the flak suits in there. And I would prepare myself for what we knew was going to happen, and that was to be hit by flak. We had some milk runs that we called that we didn't have any problem with, no flak, no enemy aircraft. But more so, we had tough missions. There was a lot of flak, a lot of enemy aircraft, and a lot of men were killed.
But once you see one of those guys go down, and, or blow up, or start spinning, and nobody comes out, or maybe 2 guys comes out in their chutes, and the rest are, there's 7 guys that are going to die. The air war was certainly what's different. Every conversation we had with the dog faces, as we called them, and they called us the flyboys. And they'd say, we'd look up there, we see these silver airplanes way up there, and we're sitting down at Foxtrot and say, no way I'd be out there. And then my retort always was, well, I was looking down and I saw you guys in the Foxtrot. Of course, you couldn't see them. But I says, no way I want to be down. I was serious about that. I was very serious. I wouldn't want anything to do with the ground operation. Those guys need more credit than they got.
Obviously, we couldn't have conquered Europe without D-Day and without the invading armies, but the stage was set by air power because it was the only way we could attack them until we actually invaded Europe. All of their strategic resources, their ability to produce oil and ball bearings and steel, and their railroad marshalling yards, their whole method of supplying their troops was interfered with or destroyed by strategic bombing.
In order to hit their targets more accurately, American bombers flew daring daylight raids deep into Germany. The results were tremendous, but so were the losses.
You look out the corner of your eye and you can see 4 flashes, and usually they're in groups of 4. And you know that they're shooting at you. And all of a sudden you see these little black poofs of smoke.
It's anti-aircraft shells exploding, of course, and they make a black puff of smoke. And you can see them as you approach the target. And a heavily defended target like Berlin, it almost seems like you could get out and walk on it. It was that thick.
The first time you look at those twinkling lights, and all of a sudden the bullets are hitting your airplane. Hollywood goes out the window.
And all of a sudden, I look ahead and I see these little tiny black puffs. And I look and I look, and I said, Clements, look, there's flak, look at the flak. He says, kid, it ain't flak until you can hear it and smell it. And I said, well, huh? And about a minute later, or a minute and a half at the most, I knew what he meant. They were bursting all around us, and literally you could hear the explosion, you could smell the cordite, very, very strong, and the airplane would bounce with these explosions, and you'd hear like rocks on a tin roof, you'd hear pieces of shrapnel hitting the aircraft. And you talk about one scared SOB, that was me, yeah.
You would start counting the parachutes that got out of the planes that got hit, and the buddies in my barracks, we got to be pretty good buddies, you know, the ones in the same barracks. And when I seen them get hit, and it really made me sick to my stomach.
My B-25 got hit with anti-aircraft fire, and the starboard right engine, caught fire. We had flak on the right and on the left and ahead of us, behind us, and following us wherever we did. And that's when I did things that the aircraft had never been built to do. I'd dive straight down, pull up, and then flatten her out suddenly. Then I realized that if I didn't give the bailout signal, none of us were going to come out of that. And I decided to give it at 2,500 feet. And at 2,500 feet on the altimeter, I reached down to pull the alarm klaxon. I handle a red klaxon, which would sound throughout the airplane, and that's a sign to bail out. And as I reached down and grabbed it, I realized I wasn't 2,500 feet at all. I was over foothills, which were maybe 1,500 feet at the most. We'd never get out of the airplane. And thank God, I thought this is in fractions of a second. And I just put the nose straight ahead, and within a few moments, I had crossed our lines into our friendly territory. And I was scared and everything, but I didn't think much of it until I heard chatter on the radio. And somebody said, I saw 083 go down, he was in flames. And I said, geez, that poor son of a bitch. And then all of a sudden I think, 083? That's me.
American bomber crews had many close calls, but flak, anti-aircraft fire, wasn't their only concern. There also was the formidable German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. While they were over France, American bombers had the luxury of fighter escorts. But once they reached Germany, they were on their own.
We had fighters at first that couldn't go the whole way, and they turned back, and that's when we really got in trouble, because they were very helpful. Later they put on drop tanks on the fighters, but the Germans caught on to that. You have to drop your tanks when you're going to engage in air-to-air combat. German fighters would come up from France, engage them, we'd drop our tanks to fight, and they'd go away. And then they weren't able to escort us all the way in, and the Germans would come up to meet us after our fighters had to turn back.
Particularly in a bomber, we were essentially defenseless and outnumbered by German fighters, left alone. And the odds of surviving that are not too great.
American bombers were designed to be flying fortresses, bristling with guns. But often their guns were no match against the attacks of the nimble German fighters, encounters the American crews would never forget.
We saw it get attacked by German fighter planes, and they were determined to stop us.
I had the two top turret guns were working and one blister gun in the nose. I just knew we weren't going to make it for somehow.
I thought we ought to bail everybody out. There was no reason to stay with an airplane with one engine, and we decided we would bail out, but then we couldn't because we found out we had some wounded aboard.
The flight leader and I were both hit. It blew the nose off my airplane and hit two of my engines. We both stayed with the formation until the bombs were dropped, and then as we start feathering engines, the formation just leaves us. So we're hanging there, and all of a sudden his entire left wing enveloped in flames and he went down.
And we saw several planes go down that were near us that lost a wing or tail section or something that was severe enough to throw them into a spin.
We were never turned back. They could shoot down an entire formation, and nobody ever turned around. And we had bomb groups go down to one airplane. That bit I'm quite proud of. But the big plan that the military counted on, the so-called flying fortress concept, was grossly overrated. None of us would ever have survived without the development of the P-51.
It had tremendous range. It was probably the best all-around fighter built by the Allies in World War II. We could pick up the bombers as they went into the enemy territory, take them anywhere they wanted to go in Europe, and bring them all the way back.
And once we got into formation, started across the channel, that's when we picked up the fighter escort. We were glad to see them.
And I remember on one of the long hauls, we were in someplace well east of Berlin. And I look, and there's a lone P-51.
We called them our little friends, and they were really made us very comfortable.
After the introduction of the P-51, the Luftwaffe could no longer engage bomber groups without getting into fierce dogfights with Allied fighter pilots.
And we were doing our thing, zigzagging across the bombers, and we hear on the radio that they're being attacked up ahead of us. And I just started to look around my right shoulder, and just as I spotted these guys, my wingman says, "Hey, we got 4 bogeys coming in on us from 5 o'clock high." And so we come around, and they can't make that turn. We come around at them head on, and here we are. We got 4 Messerschmitts across from us, and we got 4 Mustangs. Their number 4 man started to climb. The other guy makes a steep left turn like this. He wants to stick around and fight. The other guy's going to run away. So I decided to keep my power, keep my speed up, cut across the top of him and pull up. But as I'm going up, he reverses his turn. Now he's coming after me again. And So, okay. I got this thing wide open. I'm pulling up. He's pulling up. We're going like this. And first guy that stalls or runs out of airspeed is in big trouble here. So I'm pulling and I'm pulling, and I'm just praying that I can look over my shoulder and I can see that guy today if I close my eyes. Anyway, all of a sudden I see him shudder and stall, and he has to kick it off or he's going to go out of control. He kicks it around like this, I kick it around. Now I'm right back in the driver's seat again. He's not going to make it, and he starts a slight turn, and I fire a little burst there. I saw a little tracer go off the wingtip. I gave it just a little rudder. It came in, and it got him tremendous explosions all around the cockpit in the center of the airplane. But he keeps on going, just straight. Pretty soon I see his shadow, and he's heading for his shadow, and he meets it with a tremendous explosion. And that's kind of what it's like to be one-on-one in the air wars over Europe in World War II.
One of the things that few people realize is that we lost more pilots strafing than we did in air-to-air battles. Strafing airfields was very hazardous. They had guns all around those fields, quad 50s and so forth, and 20 millimeters, and they were shooting from every angle at you. It was kind of like charge of the light brigade. You were going right down through the middle of the guns and shooting up their airplanes, and of course they were trying to defend them. And we very rarely strafed an airfield that we didn't have someone either badly battle damaged or shot down. And some of our pilots didn't like to strafe, but I thought that was one of the most thrilling combat things that you could do was strafe. I really took to that.
Many of the airmen who served during the Second World War remember their tours as the most exciting time of their lives, filled with danger, adventure, and the greatest friendships they would ever know. But for all the so-called glories of war, these men also witnessed countless horrors.
I was a kid. I was a nosebleed kid. The service made a man out of me. What I went through and the death that I saw, and not just from my own crew, but from other planes going down before my 20th birthday is, you know, you don't normally see those things.
You know you did it, and you're sort of proud of it now, but still there's times and parts of it that scare the hell out of you. You know, that you do say, Jesus Christ, how did that happen? You know, how come I'm here and they're not?
The one mission that I can't forget was when we went to Hollendorf, Germany, to fly, and we got pretty well shot up. My navigator got hit in the face with some flak or something that opened up his cheek. It didn't get into his bone area, but it flipped the cheek open like that.
It was when I got out of the ball turret that I actually saw that Friday, our right waist gunner, and Palmer, the left waist gunner, were both down. Left waist gunner had both his legs cut off from the knees down.
The bombardier had a hole in his head. He was mouthing green foam and completely incoherent. The navigator had a large hole in his thigh.
We had a parachute that was opened up and put it on top of Palmer. And he was still in the plane when we left there. But we went to our briefing, and we just told them what we saw, what took place. Turned in our guns, called it a day.
Colonel Scott, and he stood up and he pulled the string, and the curtain parted, and it was the same target that we had bombed yesterday, and we had lost several B-25s, and we hadn't destroyed the target, so we had to go back. And I was so panicked that I started to, I've never been that way in my whole life, before or since, but I broke out into a sweat. I started to perspire, and I had to go to the John terribly, and my hands were shaking. I hid my hands in my legs, and all I could think of was, how the hell do I get out of this? How do I get out of it?
But every man who flew in World War II faced his fears and did his job.
Somehow, as a kid, as a youngster, you think, no, it's not me. He's going to get it, not me. I'll never get it. And somehow, I think that's what keeps everybody going.
The 8th Air Force alone, I wish I had those figures to me, had tremendous casualties. They lost more people than they lost in the whole war in Vietnam, in just one Air Force in this war. Our ratio of kills to losses was very good, but you know, when you lose one guy, that's still one guy lost, and he's a friend, and he's a face, he's somebody you know.
Each of the 31 missions that I was in the air, we had 235 casualties on that day, meaning either a prisoner of war, which we didn't know, missing in action, killed in action, or wounded in action. So that means if you multiply 235 by 31, you would get the casualties during the missions that I participated in. Psychologically, after my first mission, in which I had lost 4 of my crew when we landed, I got 1 back, and I totally lost 3. And having been responsible for them, it bothered me considerably.
We had 28 original pilots in a squadron. And we went overseas together, and then of course we started receiving replacement pilots to fill in and extend our service. Actually, exactly one half of them were either killed or were prisoners of war. That's pretty good loss rate.
Mainly the psychological effect is that once you realize that war is not Hollywood, people get killed, and men lose a leg and things like that, and it's a little hard to describe, and you just learn to live with it.
And they give you a shot of cognac. Then you come back to the mess hall if you feel like eating. Most of the guys didn't. They went to the club and had a couple of pints, you know, and something like that, and then back to bed. And 3 o'clock comes along the next morning, you're at it again. Sometimes it seemed unreal because it was 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of mixed boredom and carnage.
How did you cope with it? You kind of pulled the blind down, you know, and said it isn't going to happen to me, but you knew you were wrong. But that's kind of the attitude you had to adopt. And you got to realize we were young, and it was a great big adventure in a way. When we were, you know, when you're getting started, before you gain the experience, there's fear. There's fear of the unknown. You don't know, you don't know how you're going to react as a human being. You know, are you going to run or are you going to fight? Beforehand, when you're anticipating it, you see the contrails coming. You know, there's anticipation there. But when you're actually dogfighting, when you're in the heat of things, there's no fear. You're just too busy. I relate it to like if you're in an automobile and you have a close call. It's only afterwards that you say, "Oh my God, that was pretty close." Sort of the same thing. I've always felt that the difference between a good fighter pilot and a great fighter pilot is something internal, something mental, something up here, or something in the heart. Call it a fighting spirit, motivation, whatever. But I've always felt that makes the difference.
But every pilot thinks he's the best in the world. If he doesn't think that, he shouldn't be flying. So, I thought I was the best in the world.
You didn't take time to get all the answers before you made a decision. You just had to make a quick decision. If you were right, you lived. If you didn't, you died.
The pilots weren't the only ones who held the lives of the airmen in their hands. Back on the ground, the crew chiefs were in charge, and they felt the same heavy responsibility as the pilots, and the same love of flying.
Oh, I was flying. I've been up there by myself, but I just one day decided that you're just too ham-fisted, club-footed on the controls to ever be a good pilot, but you're a good mechanic. I quit. I was a crew chief on a P-47, and I was responsible for the maintenance on that aircraft. I don't know just how to explain it, but yes, we had pride in what we'd done. I had the best crew, the best airplane. So the other guys, they all had the same thing. They had the best crew and the best airplane. So it was always this camaraderie between us. We had pride in what we did. We were the best. We wanted to be because somebody had attacked our country and we weren't putting up with it. And this was the way we operated. I mean, we all had one goal, and that's what we were shooting for. Get home.
There were some missions where, well, most missions, everybody would have some kind of flak damage, most of it minor. But it always amazed me that these fellows would work all night, get the plane patched up, ready to fly the next day.
One of the fellows counted the holes in the airplane, and he said we had 172 places where the shots had come in, flak and all that.
And they would be repaired and put back in the morning. First thing in the morning, we'd get back out and here our plane would be ready to go. It was really amazing. They worked all night. Sometimes the weather was pretty bad, cold and all, but they would keep on doing it. They didn't get nearly the credit they should have gotten.
I don't think any of us would be here today if they hadn't been as skilled and as dedicated as they were. They wait with bated breath for us to come back from every mission. And I think they were heartbroken when somebody didn't come back.
You get yourself in a fighter squadron and you think about if you were a mechanic, if you were a crew chief on your airplane, think about it. If your airplane went down for any reason whatsoever, how you'd feel. And I think you'll understand it a little more. I had my crew chief, Otto Heino, from back here in the training all the way through the war. And he kept that airplane just running so well that it probably saved my life more than once, I think. Now, we were starting to get the airplanes in the natural aluminum paint scheme, just like they came from the factory with none of the camouflage on it. And I was flying over Germany, and the first snow would hit. And I'm looking down at a flight below me, and there's two camouflaged airplanes and then two natural aluminum airplanes. Well, guess which one stood out the most? The dark one, the camouflage against the snow. And I said, you know, this airplane, next time it goes in for heavy maintenance, let's depaint it and put it in the natural aluminum paint scheme. Well, I didn't think any more about it, and next morning we have breakfast and get our briefing, and I go in and we brief, and I get my parachute, and my revetment was right by operations, so I just walk out. I walked out, climbed up over this revetment, and I looked down at this airplane, and there it is in gleaming aluminum. And these three guys are sort of standing there at attention, and their hands were literally raw. They had gone all night long rubbing that with gasoline and scraping and getting it all cleaned up, ready to go the next day. And I felt a little bad about it. I thought, my God, did they think I gave them a direct order to do that? And I thought about it a little bit. They did it because they wanted to.
Well, we wanted it in the best possible shape we could because we did not want to lose a pilot. I mean, we tried to keep the airplane as fine a shape as we could under the conditions. And we never seemed to have any problems. We got the job done.
Strange thing is that our ground crews put us in the air day after day after day, but they never knew really what was happening. They never really knew except what we would maybe come back and tell them. But over in around after the Battle of the Bulge, about the time of the Battle of the Bulge, our group was moved over to Osh, Belgium. And On January 1st, 1945, the Germans decided that they would attack all of the Allied airfields, fighter bases, simultaneously on January 1st. We had a patrol of 12 airplanes that were preparing to take off, led by Colonel John C. Meyer, who was one of the leading aces of the war. And he saw bombs hitting the other end of the field, and he called the tower and said, "What's happening?" And they said, "We're under attack." He said, "Let's roll them, boys." And they went into the air, and as his wheels were coming up, just as his wheels came up, a German plane went across in front of him, and he turned about 10 degrees and shot it down. To me, that was so dramatic because for the first time, our enlisted men, our ground troops, our ground officers and so forth, were seeing their pilots in action, and they were watching their pilots shoot down German airplanes right above them. They had 23 victories and lost not a single airplane. And to me, that was really dramatic.
By spring of 1944, the collective efforts of the Army Air Force had paid off. Strategic bombing had crippled the German infrastructure and troop movements. Bombers and fighters had destroyed so many aircraft and aircraft factories that Germany could no longer pose a serious challenge to them in the air. Many of Germany's battle-tested flyers were gone, and the few aircraft that remained were in the hands of inexperienced pilots. With air superiority established, Allied forces on the ground were able to push toward Germany and total victory in Europe, and later, victory in Japan.
I think the war would have gone on much longer had not we had the air power that we had. Unfortunately, we, through the efforts of people back home, making those airplanes, we wouldn't have had that advantage. And there were a lot of folks, a lot of women who were involved in the manufacture of those aircraft. And we were pretty grateful to them that they made them as solid as they did.
I think one of the great things I brought back was a feeling that I had been part of something that changed the world. I don't like to use the trite expressions that made it world safe for democracy, anything like that, but it was a worldwide battle of good against evil, if you will. And it's sort of nice, gratifying to know that you were on the good side and the good side prevailed.
I read somewhere that a hero is someone who understands what has to be done and does it regardless of the consequences. And that's really all we were doing. We were assigned to do a job.
In wartime, as far as the two words bravery and courage are concerned, we thought more about not letting our buddy down. We knew what a job he had.
And it was something that you sort of felt if you got into it and you're a part of that, you know, you were really something special.
It was a great ride, but I don't want to do it again.
Well, the whole experience was maturing, let's say. We started as kids when we enlisted and came out as adults.
It's been said many, many times, guys have been in service wouldn't take $1 million for the experiences and wouldn't do it again for $100 million. So I think that pretty well sums it up. I'm glad I was there. I'm also glad I came back.
The men and women who fought the war began to build their reputation as the greatest generation by setting the standard for dedication, honor, and valor. These are the eyewitness accounts of those who fought World War II, men and women who are heroes by any standard, past or present.